Hi everyone, I'm Caitlin,
I'm May.
and we're presenting today on waking life.
So, Waking Life was directed by Richard Linklater in 2001, and it's a philosophical animated docufiction film that stars Ethan Hawke and Wiley Wiggins, and it premiered at the 2001 Sundance Film Festival. And overall, it was a very low cost film compared to Pixar and Disney animated features at the time. And the film centers on a young man who wanders through dreamlike realities and encounters individuals who engage in philosophical discussions about life. And the film explores a wide range of philosophical issues like the nature of reality, dreams, consciousness, the meaning of life, and free will. And so now we're just going to watch a trailer for the film.
Your life is yours to create. And maybe I only exist in your mind. I'm still just as real as anything else. It seemed like I'd walked into an alternate universe. You haven't met yourself yet. Trapped.
I want real human moments. I want to see you.
I'm not in an objective, rational world. You can have any kind of sex you want. Seems like everyone's sleepwalking through their waking state or walking through their dreams.
So, you produce a neo you, no longer restricted by time and space.
Just trying to get like a sense of where I am. Just wake up.
Do you remember me?
When I say love, the sound comes out of my mouth and it hits the other person's ear, travels through their memories of love or lack of love.
So can be prepared for something. I am the passenger.
On really romantic evenings of South, I go salsa dancing with my confusion.
Everyone knows fun rules.
You can do whatever you want to.
Everything is possible. You a dreamer? You know it looks so good tonight. Yeah. I see too many around lately. Oh, the passenger.
So, as you can see, the film's visual style is very striking throughout the film. And the film is a hybrid of live action and animation. So, although the film is animated, the imagery and action are derived from real people. And so, the film was shot with handheld Sony digital cameras. And then the footage was edited and processed with a computer software called Photoshop. And they also used a device called a Wacom tablet, which kind of looks like an iPad with an electronic pen that you can use to draw on it with. And so this device allowed the filmmakers to turn the video footage into animation that resembles an impressionist painting. So they had a lot more creative freedom. And so the general process is called interpolated rotoscoping. So this is an update from traditional rotoscoping, which is how original animations like Snow White were made. And so original rotoscoping was a lot more rigid and mechanical, but the new tablet that they used in the film allowed for more fluidity. And the use of color is also very important throughout the film because different sequences have their own very distinct visual style. And color is also used to heighten each character's distinct personality. And each animator that was working on the film followed a character throughout the film and gave them their own color scheme and traits that they thought were appropriate. And spatial and temporal distortions are also really interesting to note in the film. because in a lot of ways, the film's narrative style reflects contemporary culture's spatial tendencies, where we're constantly interacting with technology around us, like ATMs, cell phones, and computer screens. And so the director shows how disoriented we are in real life. And he does this through his very distinct visual style, where space and time almost cease to exist. And so some of the major themes of the film are that rather than being a story, it's more of a tour of personalities. And so linear narrative almost evaporates in favor of a series of discontinuous discussions. And by doing this, the director is able to redefine the nature of the story by depicting an unending dream that the narrator suffers through. And another major theme is the notion that dream is destiny, which is set at the very beginning of the film, and it's waking life's guiding principle. And with that, there's an element of the sublime and transcendence throughout the film. And this is also elevated through the main character's inability to distinguish his dreams from reality. And retrospection is also very important because the film looks back at the director's previous films and even recreates some of the scenes. So for example, he recreates the scene from Before Sunrise, where Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy are talking in bed. And a lot of the characters also discuss religion and divine intervention. So two of the characters discuss how free will fits into religion and the laws of physics that govern the world. And even in the end, the director almost plays the role of God in animated form. So the narrator, Wiley, asks the director for help, and the director replies, "It's easy, just wake up." And a lot of people interpret this as the director playing the voice of God. And film as a medium is also discussed in the film, and how film is a reproduction of reality. And one character even says that film is a record of God. And he also talks about Bazan, and he says that for Bazan, film is basically just photography with the addition of a dimension of time. And as a Christian, Bazan believed in God. So for him, reality was God. And because film reproduces reality, film in this way also captures God. And I thought the scene was very powerful because it shows how engaging the film is as a medium, and it really requires the audience to think about what the characters discuss and what they talk about.
Okay, so with the background on Waking Life, I'm going to kind of locate it within digital cinema as a whole at that time. So digital cinema first became usable, I guess, in the 80s. The television industry was actually the first to adopt digital cinematography. This was for a couple of reasons, largely because the image wasn't super high quality and looked much better on a small screen than the big screen for film. When digital cameras first came out, they were extremely expensive, and so large television companies and networks were the only organizations who could afford to shoot digitally. Digital images did not project well with the projection infrastructure in place until HD cameras became available with a much higher resolution image. And at this point, the digital footage would have to be transferred to just 35 millimeter film and projected through just a traditional 35 millimeter film projector. And digital cinematography began to infiltrate mainstream cinema in the early 2000s, around the time this film was made, and it often was a blend of traditional film shooting and digital cinematography. But throughout the 90s, digital cinematography had very strong ties to avant-garde and indie filmmaking. Part of the reason it took such a long time to work its way into the mainstream were the concerns regarding the cost of new exhibition equipment and the way that would have required the entire exhibition infrastructure to change the way they projected film. So there are some aesthetic differences between shooting on film and shooting digitally, some of which have been resolved with our technology now, some of which not so much. So the image on the top right-hand corner shows the same mountain shot on the left on film and on the right digitally. So obviously shooting on film results in a much richer color. And there can be some poor image quality in conditions of very high or very low light shooting on digital, whereas shooting on film is a lot closer to just what our eyes would see. There's also this issue of poor image quality of highlights and poor image quality in conditions of extremely highlight. So some digital cameras altered the tonality in order to preserve certain colors and tones. But what that means is that something like the sky with a lot of light could be completely blown out and completely whitened in the image, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. And some filmmakers actually prefer this because they're able to adjust the tonality in post-production and make it look how they want in terms of their aesthetic vision for the film. But it can be just kind of a nuisance within shooting. And then there's also the question of focus issues digitally. It's quite a bit easier to get the focus that you want when shooting on film, and you can kind of see that, although it's somewhat blocked by May and I. In the top right-hand corner, you can see the issues with focus on the mountain. So what this meant for the art film, the digital cinematography was kind of an option for independent avant-garde filmmakers for many years, just to cut costs after digital cameras became quite a bit cheaper. So this was kind of the progression of like 8mm and 16mm filmmakers who then turned to shooting digitally for the same reason, to cut cost. And this was also a style of filmmaking that was much less concerned with like production value and image quality and much more invested in like this particular lo-fi aesthetic. At this point, the digital footage would still have to be transferred onto 35mm film stock for projection. But a couple of really notable and successful uses of digital cinematography were in Dogma 95 films. So I have stills from The Celebration, which is on top, and Julian Donkey Boy, which is on the bottom. And in that still, I think you can see a lot of the issues that we talked about with digital cinematography, with the sky completely whitened, poor image quality, poor focus, just strange lighting. But at the same time, I think that aesthetic and that lo-fi look was very important to this film in particular, but like Dogma 95 films as a whole. And I think Linklater's rotoscoping was kind of a similar concept and a similar use of digital, where he's reimagining what this lo-fi aesthetic could look like. He's reimagining what animation could look like within an art film, and he's reimagining animation not as this hyper-realistic CGI aspect of film, but like as its own aesthetic in and of itself.
And so overall, the film had very positive reviews. And in Variety, this reviewer praises the artistic innovation of the combination of technology with reality, which he says is a new tool and means of expression. And similarly, the New York Times praises the brilliant visual style of the film that merges photography and animation. And the author explains that this is a powerful metaphor for the suspension between waking and dreaming evoked by the movie.
There's also a reviewer in The Guardian who made some interesting points. He mentions, of course, like just the completely psychedelic aesthetic of the film, and in particular, the way that static objects would kind of throb and pulse, and come apart and then come back together. But he had a really interesting point that while all of this was kind of at the time of increasing use of CGI and increasingly realistic use of animation in film, he really makes a case for this type of animation, which is completely unrealistic and quite a bit more painterly, but he makes a case for that style as an artistic choice in and of itself. And in particular, he describes the seductive hyperreality, which, whether or not he meant to, kind of evokes Baudrillard, who's a philosopher who dealt quite a bit with like the function of the simulation and the function of simulation when you can't tell if it's a simulation or reality. And in terms of like the themes of this film and just filmmaking as a whole right now, this is a really important use of hyperreality, and like it's just a really important way to describe the film in particular. Yeah, it's here. We're excited. Thank you very much.
Thank you.